Hello friends, welcome to a short tutorial on MATLAB Grader. This tutorial is a part of the faculty development program that's being organized by the Teaching Learning Center at IIT Madras. MATLAB Grader is one of the online assessment tools that we have available today. In fact, it is a product of MathWorks, and it's a part of the MATLAB suite of products that allows automated assessment of a learner's ability to code and execute theoretical concepts that they learn in the class in any learning environment. What we mean by this is there are many courses that use MATLAB as a supporting software. And in all such courses, the course faculty can use MATLAB Grader to set up questions and assessments so as to test the understanding of a student or to enhance the learning skills of a learner. And this can be integrated in any learning environment such as Moodle. So there is a way to integrate MATLAB Grader with any LMS, and the integration of MATLAB Grader with Moodle in the institute is a work in progress and should be completed soon. How do we access MATLAB Grader? Well, it can be accessed via the URL given here. Just go to grader.mathworks.com and log in with your MathWorks account. So user ID should be the institute's email address, and the password is what you set for the account to log in. And once you log in, you can either go through the 4-minute video tour if you wish. It's a quick tour, but this tutorial essentially should cover most of that that is discussed in the video. Or you can go through the documentation before you begin, or straight away frame your questions. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go over a few set of slides that will serve as a reference document for you, a very quick reference document for you, and then take you to a demo of using MATLAB Grader. So let's continue. Using MATLAB Grader, in fact, is fairly easy. It consists of 4 steps as outlined here. First, you develop the content, and content here means essentially a question bank. And these questions can be optionally arranged topic-wise. Once you have your question bank ready, then you create a course wherein you set up the assignments. In fact, you also set the start and closing date for the course and for the assignments and so on. And then you enroll learners, and if needed, you can collaborate with instructors as well. And finally, you run the course, which is where the grader is going to be at work, and analyze the solutions after the students have submitted their answers. Right? So the core step of framing an assessment, essentially the purpose of MATLAB Grader is to assess, but as I said, you can also use it as a teaching tool. So the core step of framing an assessment consists of setting up a problem and a reference solution. So you set up the question based on the topic that you want to test, and you also have to provide a reference solution, which is what the grader will refer to when evaluating a student's answer. What can you assess is the big question, right? Can you assess anything? Well, not really. You can test for variable values. So typically what you would do is, as a student or even you, as you work out a problem in MATLAB, you generate a lot of variables, and these variables are assigned values, but not all of them may be important. Depending on the problem of interest, there are certain key variables that constitute the set of variables for assessment. So you compare the values of the variables generated by the student with the one that you have in the reference solution. That is one way of assessing the goodness of a solution or an answer. Obviously, what happens in this is the student or the learner can directly assign values to variables without really executing a script. Now, that's currently a kind of a shortfall of Grader, but you can have certain workarounds for that. One of the ways to work around that is to test the absence or presence of a function or a keyword. You can do that. You can insist, for example, as I will show you in the demo, that a certain function be used, or you can insist that a function should not be used. You can also write a code on top of what you have written at the time of assessment. So there is a reference solution, but the variables created in the solution may not be exactly what you're asking for. You're asking for something else. So you can write a small chunk of code that takes variables from the reference solution, does some processing, and compares it with the student's answer. All of this will be kind of clear when I do the demo. There are essentially 4 steps when you frame an assessment, because this is the core step, and I'm going to spend a few minutes on this. It is useful to provide a description for the problem. So the first step is to provide a title and description for the problem that you are setting up, so that there is some background information being provided. And this background information can be in the form of text, images, equations, and links. So combination of all of this can be used. There is a inbuilt equation editor that runs on LaTeX, which allows you to insert mathematical symbols. Once you have given the sufficient background information, then you can add your design problem. That is, you may set up a problem of your own, or you can copy an existing one. In fact, when you copy an existing one, the title and description that is available for the existing question. When I say existing question here, I'm referring to the questions that are already there in the question bank that you would have previously created, or certain standard sample questions that MathWorks has in its own library of questions. Either way, when you copy an existing question, the title and description also gets copied. And the nice thing about this grader is you can have both a script-based and function-based problems. Now, for those of you, of course, who are familiar with MATLAB, you know what is the difference between a script and a function. So in a script-based, you're only looking for answers, that is the correctness of the answers. Whereas in a function-based, you're not only looking at the answer, but also looking at the input arguments that it takes, the output arguments, how the function should return the output, and so on. So there is a bit more that you are assessing when you have a function-based problem. And the other thing is you can provide data or codes in the form of MATLAB readable files. So you may have some data that you want the student to use, or you may have written a script that you want the user to run at certain point in the solution. You can provide that as well. And step 3 is to set up a reference solution. Once you have defined your problem, you set up a reference solution, which of course will be invisible to the assessee. And if needed, a learner's template can be provided. This is usually recommended. That is, you provide the first few lines on how the learner should begin with, and also insist, of course, that the variable should have certain names, so that you can assess and you can, in fact, you can compare variables. If the names used by the learner or the student are going to be different from what you have in the reference solution, at the time of assessment, it will flag an error. But one can avoid that by putting that requirement into the description as well as in the learner's template. Again, I'll show you that in the demo. And the final step for framing an assessment is to frame the test questions. That is, you have a problem description, and then there is a MATLAB code that has to be run. But what exactly you want to test is very important, right? So you may have, for instance, you may ask the student to estimate certain parameters given a data set. and there may be more than one parameter that the student is estimating. So you can set up questions, one question per parameter. That could be one of your assessment questions. The other assessment question is whether the student has used or not used a particular function, depending on how you have framed your assessment or your entire question. And you could also run what are known as pre-tests. That's a good idea to have it in place. These pre-tests are essentially going to ensure that the student begins at the right point. And usually you don't award any marks for the pre-test. Of course, it's the prerogative of the course faculty. But pre-test is to just make sure that the student has followed all the instructions and that has chosen certain values for variables that the student should choose as described in the problem, or could be any other pre-test. All right, so that also I'll show you in the demo. And finally, when you are done with framing this assessment and setting up the problem, it's a good idea to switch between the instructor and learner's view to see what is, how the problem appears to the learner, whether it is exactly the way you want the learner to see. Now let me close this short slide-based presentation with a few remarks, right? Obviously, when we give out questions or assessments to students remotely, we are interested in randomization. So this randomization could be in the form of choosing questions randomly from a bank, or for a given question, randomizing the parameter values. Now, the latter is possible. So it turns out that you can obviously randomize parameter values in MATLAB using MATLAB's built-in function. So you could draw parameter values from a Gaussian distribution, uniform distribution, randomly from some distribution, and make sure that each student sees a different kind of problem, not exactly the entire problem, but at least a different setting. On the other hand, it is presently not possible with Grader to choose randomly from a question bank. So you may have created 20 questions and you want to randomly assign one question to the student. Unfortunately, that's not possible. But the good news is that it can be done via a learning management system, such as Moodle. And as I mentioned early on, it is possible to integrate Grader with Moodle, and that's a work in progress at the moment. And I think it should be done soon. When you do that, you can have questions, your question bank in Moodle, and tell Moodle that this is a MATLAB based question, and also instruct Moodle to choose randomly from this bank of MATLAB based questions, and that's it. So you're done. The other point to remember is that students can directly assign values. I've talked about this. This is just a reiteration of what I've said earlier. The students can directly assign values to variables in the script and still score full on the assessment. Obviously, we don't want that. We want the student to work out the problem, write the code for it, and get to the answer. Therefore, it is important to have at least one assessment question that mandates or prohibits the use of certain functions, or the other strategy is to have intermediate variables and have an assessment on the values of intermediate variables as well. But all said and done, always when you're testing only based on variables, the risk of directly assigning a known value in the script always exists. So more or less it becomes mandatory to have one assessment question that mandates or prohibits the use of certain pre-specified functions. Now, when it comes to the number of attempts that a learner can have, there are two options. Fortunately, it could be unlimited or limited. And in my viewpoint, the unlimited options is useful for learning, where you're not really assessing. You have just set up an assessment, but it's more of a more for self-assessment rather than the course faculty assessing the learner. So you can have unlimited options, and then you can provide the statistics to the learner. On the other hand, when you're conducting an exam, limited options, or when you're, let us say, setting up an assignment. Limited options is quite useful. And of course, how many attempts you want the user to make is your call, right? And finally, it's possible to view learner analytics for each problem in the assignment. Alternatively, you can also monitor the assignment progress for a given class. So there are some nice analytics that MATLAB Grader generates for you. How many times a student has attempted, or how many questions has been answered correctly by the class, and so on. So there are some very interesting analytics that you can look at and gauge the progress of the class in learning that concept. All right. So now it's time for us to move on to the demo. So get ready with your laptop with the internet access, where we will go to the URL that I provided earlier, grader.mathworks.com, and then I'll show you how to set up an assessment. All right. So see you soon.